Story 1. The Phantom of Western Infirmary. My name is Mary McClellan, and in 1975 I was a nurse at Glasgow's Western Infirmary. The hospital was a maze of old stone corridors, their walls stained with decades of wear and wards that creaked under the weight of time. I'd worked the night shift for years, grown used to the dim lights and the way shadows danced at the corners. But nothing could have prepared me for what I saw that year, a presence that still haunts my dreams. It was just after 2 a.m. on a biting November night. The ward was quiet, save for the soft beep of monitors and the occasional groan of a sleeping patient. I was at the nurse's station, scribbling notes on a chart, when a flicker of movement caught my eye. At the far end of the corridor, where the light barely reached, stood a tall, silver-haired man in a blue dressing gown. He was still, his back to me, facing the wall, as if studying something I couldn't see. I assumed he was a patient, maybe disoriented, wandering from his bed. It wasn't uncommon. I set my pen down and started toward him, my shoes squeaking faintly on the polished floor. "Sir?" I called softly, not wanting to wake the others. He didn't move. The air grew colder as I approached, a sharp, unnatural chill that prickled my skin. I was maybe 10 feet away when he turned his head slightly, just enough for me to catch the edge of his profile, sharp cheekbones, a gaunt face. His eyes, though, I couldn't see. It was as if the shadows clung to them. "Sir, you shouldn't be out here," I said, my voice trembling despite myself. He didn't respond. Instead, he stepped forward and vanished around the corner. I froze, my heart thudding. The corridor was a dead end. There was no door, no room, no place for him to go. I forced myself to move, rounding the corner to find nothing, just the blank wall, the same faded paint, and that lingering cold. My breath fogged in front of me, though the hospital was always kept warm. I stood there trying to make sense of it when I heard footsteps behind me. "Mary!" It was Ellen, the overnight ward nurse, her face pale as she ran toward me. "Did you see him?" Her voice was a harsh whisper, her eyes wide with panic. "See who?" I asked, though I already knew. "The man, the one in the blue gown." She grabbed my arm, her fingers digging in. "I saw him too, standing right where you were. I thought he was a patient, but—" She trailed off, her gaze darting to the empty corridor. "Mary, he's not alive." I felt the floor tilt beneath me. Ellen told me in halting whispers that the man I'd seen matched the description of Mr. Alistair Gray, a patient who died 2 days earlier. He'd been a quiet man, admitted for a heart condition, always polite but distant. He'd passed in his sleep, alone in his room at the end of the ward, the same ward where I'd just seen him. I didn't sleep that night. Every creak of the building, every flicker of the lights felt like a warning. The next shift, I told myself it was a trick of the mind, exhaustion playing games. But the other nurses had stories too. A cleaner swore she'd seen a shadow move across a wall with no one to cast it. A junior doctor mentioned feeling watched in the old surgical wing where the lights always flickered. Whispers of the gray-haired ghost started to spread, a figure seen only in glimpses, always at night, always silent. A week later, I was on another night shift, restocking supplies in a storage room near the old wing. The hospital was quieter than usual, the air heavy with that same unnatural chill. I was alone, or so I thought, when I heard it. A soft, deliberate tap, like a finger against glass. I turned, expecting to see Ellen or another nurse, but the doorway was empty. The tapping came again, sharper this time, from the window behind me. My stomach twisted. The storage room was on the 3rd floor. I forced myself to look. The window was black, reflecting only the dim bulb above me. But as I stared, a shape formed in the glass, a faint outline of a man, tall, silver-haired, his face blurred but unmistakable. I stumbled back, knocking over a box of gauze. The light flickered, and when it steadied, the reflection was gone. But the tapping didn't stop. It followed me, slow and rhythmic, as I fled the room and locked the door behind me. I didn't tell anyone that time. They'd think I was losing it, and maybe I was. But the next night, Ellen pulled me aside. "It's not just you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I saw him again, in the stairwell. He was just standing there looking up at me. I ran, Mary. I couldn't breathe." Her hand shook as she spoke, and I knew she wasn't lying. Something was in the hospital, something that didn't belong. The sightings grew more frequent. A porter claimed he'd seen the man in the blue gown walk through a locked door. A patient, an elderly woman, woke screaming about a figure at the foot of her bed, watching her. The staff started avoiding the old wing, where the air always felt wrong, heavy with a presence we couldn't explain. I started dreading my shifts, my eyes scanning every shadow, every corner. But I couldn't quit. The hospital was my life, and I told myself I could handle it. Then came the night that broke me. It was late December, the hospital half empty as patients were discharged for the holidays. I was doing rounds in the East Ward checking charts when I felt it. That chill again, sharper than before. The lights dimmed just for a second, and I heard footsteps behind me. Slow, deliberate, like someone pacing me. I turned, but the corridor was empty. The footsteps kept coming, closer now, until they stopped right behind me. I felt breath on my neck, cold and steady, but when I spun around, there was nothing. I ran to the nurse's station, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would burst. Ellen was there, her face ashen. "Mary, you're white as a sheet," she said, standing. Before I could answer, the phone rang, a shrill, jarring sound that made us both jump. Ellen answered, her voice shaking. "Ward 4, hello?" Silence. Then her eyes widened, and she dropped the receiver. "It was him," she whispered, a man's voice. "He said, check on her." We didn't need to ask who. We sprinted to room 12, where Mrs. Campbell, an elderly patient with pneumonia, was staying. She was asleep, her breathing shallow but steady. But as we stood there, the monitor beeped, an irregular rhythm, then a flat line. We worked fast, calling the crash team, but it was too late. Mrs. Campbell was gone. Later, the doctor said it was a heart attack, sudden and unstoppable. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something else had been in that room with us. After that, the hospital felt different. The air was heavier, the shadows darker. I started seeing him more often. The man in the blue gown, always at the edge of my vision, always gone when I looked directly. He'd stand at the end of corridors and doorways or just outside windows, watching. Other staff saw him too, though no one spoke of it openly. We'd exchange glances, silent agreement that we weren't imagining it. The hospital was haunted, and we were all part of its story now. One night, I was in the basement, retrieving files from the old records room. The fluorescent lights buzzed, casting a sickly glow over the rows of cabinets. I was alone, or so I thought, when I heard a whisper. My name, soft and deliberate, like a breath in my ear. Mary. I dropped the folder I was holding, papers scattering across the floor. The whisper came again, closer, from the shadows at the far end of the room. I grabbed my flashlight, its beam shaking in my hand, and pointed it into the darkness. There he was, Alistair Gray, or whatever he'd become, standing motionless, his blue gown glowing faintly in the gloom. His face was clearer this time, his eyes hollow, locked on mine. I don't remember running, but I must have, because I was suddenly upstairs, gasping. The records room door locked behind me. I never went back there. I started taking different routes, avoiding the old wing, the basement, anywhere the air felt wrong. But he was everywhere. I'd see him in reflections, in the flicker of a dying light, in the space between blinks. He never spoke again, but his presence was a weight, a reminder that I'd seen something I wasn't meant to. The final night I saw him was in January. I was finishing my shift, exhausted, my nerves frayed. The hospital was quiet, the corridors empty as I walked to the locker room to change. The lights flickered, and I felt it. That chill, that pressure, like the air itself was watching me. I turned, and there he was, standing at the end of the corridor, closer than he'd ever been. His face was pale, almost translucent, his eyes dark pits that seemed to pull me in. He raised a hand, pointing at me, and I heard it again. My name, not whispered this time, but clear, sharp, like a command. "Mary!" I screamed, the sound echoing in the empty hall. The lights went out, plunging me into darkness. I fumbled for the wall, my hands shaking, and ran, not stopping until I was outside, the cold night air burning my lungs. I didn't go back to work after that. I couldn't. I took leave, then quit entirely, moving to a smaller clinic across the city. Western Infirmary closed years later, its wards left to rot. But I know he's still there. I feel it sometimes, even now, a chill, a whisper, a shadow that doesn't belong. I heard the stories continued after I left. Nurses saw him in the old wing. Doctors felt him in empty rooms. Patients complained of a man watching them, always gone when the lights came on. The hospital's gone now, but the stories aren't. They linger, passed from nurse to nurse, a warning to those who walk the night shift. He's still there in the shadows of Glasgow's old wards, waiting, watching, and sometimes, when the night is too quiet, I still hear him say my name. Story 2. The Shadow of the Scalpel. My name is Jeff Glidewell, and I used to think pain was my worst enemy. That was before I met Dr. Christopher Duntsch. This is my story, a descent into a nightmare that began with hope and ended in a darkness I can still feel in my bones. It was spring 2013, and my neck was a constant scream. At 53, I'd retired early in Dallas, dreaming of quiet days with my wife, Robin, maybe some golf if my body allowed. But the pain stole that dream. Every turn of my head was a knife, twisting in my spine, radiating down my arms until my fingers tingled like they were asleep. Doctors called it cervical stenosis, a narrowing of the spine that crushed my nerves. I tried physical therapy, injections, anything to avoid surgery, but nothing worked. That's when I found him, Dr. Duntsch, a neurosurgeon with a website gleaming with promise. His reviews glowed. Miracle worker, saved my life. His resume boasted top-tier training, a confident smile in his photo sealing the deal. I booked a consultation, desperate for relief. The first meeting was strange. Duntsch's office was sparse, almost temporary, with boxes stacked in corners like he'd just moved in. He was younger than I expected, maybe mid-30s, with a footballer's build and a voice that filled the room. He leaned forward, eyes locked on mine, and said, "Jeff, I can fix you. This surgery's routine for me." He sketched my spine on a notepad, explaining how he decompressed the nerves. His confidence was infectious, and I ignored the flicker of unease when he rushed through my questions. Robin squeezed my hand as we left, hopeful for the first time in years. Surgery day came fast. Too fast, I'd later think. University General Hospital felt sterile but hollow, its halls eerily quiet. I was prepped, IVs dripping, nurses murmuring. Duntsch arrived 3 hours late, wearing faded jeans and a wrinkled scrub top, his eyes glassy and distant. Robin later said he looked like a zombie, but I was already fading under sedation, clinging to his promise of a pain-free life. As the anesthesia pulled me under, his face was the last thing I saw, looming over me with a scalpel in hand. I woke to chaos. My throat burned like I'd swallowed fire, and my left side felt wrong, heavy, unresponsive. I tried to speak, but only a rasp came out. Duntsch was there, his voice sharp. "Jeff, stay calm. We hit a complication." Complication? My vision swam as nurses rushed around, monitors beeping wildly. I caught fragments. Hemorrhage, vocal cords, esophagus. My chest tightened, not just from fear, but because breathing felt like sucking air through a straw. Robin's face appeared, pale and trembling, her hand gripping mine. "What did you do to him?" she demanded, but Duntsch was already gone. Days blurred in the ICU. Tubes snaked from my throat, my arm, my chest. I couldn't move my left side, my fingers numb and useless. Doctors whispered about a punctured artery, a sliced esophagus, severed vocal cords. Worst of all, they found a surgical sponge left inside me, sewn into my neck like a grotesque souvenir. I wanted to scream, but my voice was gone, stolen by the man who'd promised to save me. Robin stayed by my side, her eyes red but fierce. "We'll get through this," she said, but I saw her fear when she thought I wasn't looking. Rehabilitation was a slow torture. I learned to swallow again, one tiny bite at a time, my throat scarred and tight. My left arm tingled constantly, a ghost of sensation that mocked me. I'd lie awake at night, replaying that day, Duntsch's blank stare haunting me. Robin dug into his past, her laptop glowing late into the night. What she found chilled us. Duntsch wasn't a miracle worker. He was a monster. Patients across Dallas told stories like mine. Paralysis, nerve damage, lives shattered. 2 had died under his knife. Newspapers called him Doctor Death, a butcher masquerading as a surgeon. How had he gotten away with it? The truth unraveled slowly, each revelation a fresh wound. Duntsch had bounced between hospitals, his trail of victims growing. Colleagues had raised alarms, botched surgeries, erratic behavior, but hospitals passed him along, protecting their reputations. His charm was his weapon, disarming patients and staff, even as he left carnage in his wake. My surgery was his last before the Texas Medical Board finally suspended him. But by then, 33 of his 37 patients were maimed, their lives upended like mine. I wasn't alone, but that brought no comfort. I met others, their faces mirroring my own, haunted, betrayed. There was Mary, a mother of 3, now quadriplegic after Duntsch fixed her back. Jerry, a construction worker whose legs stopped working after a routine procedure. We shared our stories in hushed tones, each one a thread in a tapestry of horror. Duntsch's arrest in 2015 felt like a hollow victory. He faced charges for injuring us, for assault with a deadly weapon, his scalpel. The trial was a circus, his defense claiming incompetence, not malice. But the evidence was damning. X-rays of mangled spines, medical records of impossible errors, witnesses who saw his hand shake in the OR. In 2017, the jury delivered justice. Guilty. Life in prison, no parole. The judge's words echoed, "In your case, life must mean life." Duntsch was the first doctor in U.S. history jailed for harming patients in the operating room. His mugshot stared blankly, the charisma gone, replaced by something empty. I watched from the courtroom, Robin's hand in mine, feeling no relief. Justice couldn't give me back my voice, my arm, my life. The nightmares never stopped. I'd wake gasping, feeling the scalpel's cold kiss on my throat. Robin and I moved to a smaller house, one I could navigate with my limitations. I tried to find purpose, volunteering to warn others about rogue doctors. But the shadow of Duntsch lingered. Texas changed its laws, tightening oversight, but it felt too late for us. The hospitals that enabled him settled lawsuits, their apologies empty. My pain, once confined to my neck, now lived in my soul. I still see him sometimes, not in person, but in the quiet moments when my guard is down. His face flashes in the mirror, his voice whispering, "I can fix you." I know he's locked away, but his shadow stretches far. A reminder that monsters don't always hide in the dark. Sometimes they walk into your life with a smile and a scalpel, and you don't run until it's too late. Story 3. Poisoned Progress. My name is Dr. Michael Swango, and I am a healer, or so they thought. The truth is, I've always been drawn to the edge of life, where the pulse slows, where the body falters, where I decide who stays and who slips away. It's not about power, not really. It's about precision. The quiet thrill of watching a life unravel, thread by thread, under my careful hands. I am not a monster. I am a scientist, an artist, and this is my story. A trail of shadows cast across hospital wards and forgotten clinics, from Illinois to New York to the dust-choked rooms of Zimbabwe. It began in Quincy, Illinois, in the early 1980s. Blessing Hospital was a small, trusting place, its corridors humming with the soft beeps of monitors and the shuffle of nurses' shoes. I was a young doctor, fresh from medical school, my white coat crisp, my smile disarming. They liked me, my colleagues. They trusted me. That was their first mistake. I started small. A cup of coffee here, a sandwich there, left on the break room table for the paramedics and nurses. I'd linger nearby, watching as they sipped or chewed, oblivious to the faint bitterness I'd laced into their food. Arsenic is a subtle poison, you see. It creeps in, masquerading as a stomach bug or fatigue, until the body collapses under its weight. I'd chosen my doses carefully, not enough to kill, not yet. Just enough to make them writhe, to send them home, clutching their stomachs, pale and sweating. 5 of them fell ill that summer of 1985. 5 faces I'd smiled at, shared jokes with, now contorted in pain. I stood by their bedsides, feigning concern, adjusting IVs, scribbling notes. Food poisoning, I'd say, shaking my head. Must be something going around. But the lab tests told a different story. Arsenic, undeniable in their blood. The police came, their eyes narrowing as they questioned me. I was calm, cooperative. I had to be. But the evidence piled up, and soon I was in a courtroom, a judge's voice booming, calling me diabolical. 5 years in prison, they said. A small price for my experiment, a minor setback. I sat in my cell, planning, always planning. They thought they'd stop me, they hadn't. Paroled in 1987, I was free, my record stained, but my ambition intact. I moved to Long Island, New York, where the Veterans Affairs Hospital welcomed me with open arms. A doctor with my credentials? A godsend, they thought. I smiled at their trust, their naivety. The hospital was a labyrinth of opportunity, wards filled with elderly patients, their charts thick with ailments, their lives fragile as glass. I chose carefully Thomas Sammarco, George Ciano, Aldo Serini, men whose deaths would raise no flags, whose passing would be chalked up to age or illness. I'd slip into their rooms at night, the hospital quiet except for the hum of machines, the IV drips were my canvas, the syringe my brush, a small injection, potassium chloride perhaps, or a cocktail of my own design, and their hearts would stutter, then stop. I'd stand over them, watching the monitors flatline, feeling the air grow heavy with finality. 3 men, 3 deaths, all under my hand. I was meticulous, leaving no trace, no reason for suspicion. But suspicion came anyway. A nurse noticed first. She'd seen me lingering near Sammarco's bed the night he died. Then Ciano, then Serini. She whispered to others, and soon the whispers grew louder. Charts were reviewed, patterns emerged. I was too careful to be caught outright, but the questions were enough. I resigned, quietly, slipping away before they could pin me down. I always knew when to leave, but I wasn't done. The world was vast, and my work was unfinished. I fled to Zimbabwe in the early 1990s, where clinics were desperate for doctors, where oversight was a luxury they couldn't afford. The heat was oppressive, the wards cramped, the patients endless. Perfect. I moved from clinic to clinic, my bag of syringes and vials always close. I didn't need to know their names. They were experiments, each one a test of my skill. A dose too small, and they'd linger, gasping. Too much, and the death was too quick, too obvious. I perfected my craft in those dusty rooms where no one thought to question a foreign doctor's methods. Patients died, dozens perhaps. I lost count. A fever here, a collapse there, all blamed on disease or poor conditions. I'd stand by, offering condolences, my face a mask of sympathy. But inside, I was alive, electric with the knowledge of what I'd done. I was untouchable, a ghost moving through their lives, leaving only death in my wake. Back in the States, the net was tightening. The FBI had started piecing it together. Quincy, Long Island, now whispers of deaths abroad. They called me a pathological killer, said I might have claimed 60 lives. 60. The number thrilled me, though I'd never confirm it. Let them guess. Let them chase shadows. I was arrested in 1997 trying to board a flight. They caught me, finally, but not before I'd left my mark across 2 continents. In 2000, I stood in a federal courtroom, pleading guilty to the Long Island murders. I admitted it calmly, my voice steady. I administered toxic substances which I knew were likely to cause death. Life in prison, no parole. The families of my victims glared at me, their eyes burning with hate, vowing I'd live in a living hell. I smiled faintly. Hell? I'd built my own world, one where I was God. Now, in ADX Florence, the Supermax prison, I sit in a cell of concrete and steel. The walls are thick, the guards watchful, but my mind is free. I replay my work, every patient, every dose, every flatline. They call me a monster, a murderer. They don't understand. I was never careless, never sloppy. I was a doctor, and I chose who lived and who died. That was my art, my legacy. The world moves on, but I remain a shadow in their nightmares. They'll never know how many I took, how many I spared. And as I sit here in the silence of my cell, I know one thing. If given the chance, I'd do it all again. The pulse, the poison, the power. It's who I am, and no cage can change that. Story 4. Britain's Doctor of Death. I was Dr. Harold Shipman, the trusted physician of Hyde, a quiet town nestled near Manchester. My patients adored me, always said I had a gentle touch, a kind ear. They'd smile when I walked into their homes, my black bag swinging at my side, filled with tools to ease their aches. But they never saw the shadow that trailed me, the one that whispered in my ear, urging me to wield a different kind of power, the kind that didn't heal. It began in the 1970s when I first set up my practice. I was young, eager to prove myself. The elderly especially flocked to me, widows and pensioners, their bodies frail, but their trust unshakable. They'd invite me in for tea, tell me stories of their youth. I'd nod, scribble notes in their charts, all the while feeling that shadow stir. It wasn't enough to mend their pains. I wanted to decide their fates. My first was Mrs. Ellen Harper, 78, back in 75. She lived alone, her heart weak, her eyes cloudy with cataracts. I visited her one rainy afternoon, her cottage dim and musty. She smiled as I checked her pulse, her wrist thin as a bird's bone. "You're a good lad, Dr. Shipman," she said. I smiled back, but my mind was elsewhere. In my bag was a syringe filled with diamorphine I'd siphoned from a terminal patient's prescription. The shadow whispered, "Do it. See what it feels like." My hands trembled as I slid the needle into her vein. Her eyes fluttered, her breath slowed, then stopped. I sat there, heart pounding, watching her face slacken. It was exhilarating. I wrote in her chart, natural causes, heart failure. No one questioned it. After that, the shadow grew bolder. I learned to be clever, to cover my tracks. I'd visit patients at home, always alone, always with my bag. I'd forge prescriptions for morphine, claiming it was for cancer patients who'd passed or didn't exist. The pharmacists never blinked. I'd inject my chosen ones, always elderly, always women, always trusting, then sit with them as they slipped away. I'd write soothing notes in their records, peaceful passing, expected decline. The families thanked me for my care. By the 1980s, I'd perfected my craft. Mrs. Clara Thompson, 81, went quietly in her armchair, her knitting still in her lap. Mr. Arthur Wells, 76, slumped in his garden shed, tools scattered around him. Each time, the shadow roared with approval. I felt invincible, a god in a white coat. No one suspected a thing. Why would they? I was their doctor, their savior. But the shadow was greedy. It wanted more. By the 1990s, I was killing more often, sometimes 2 or 3 a month. Mrs. Winifred Meller, 73, was one. She'd called me to her flat, complaining of chest pains. I arrived, calm as ever, and sat by her side. "Don't worry, Winnie," I said, patting her hand. The needle was quick, the morphine quicker. She sighed, her eyes glazing over. I left her there, her tea cooling on the table, and wrote, "Cardiac arrest, no intervention needed." Her daughter hugged me at the funeral, tears in her eyes. "Thank you for being there," she said. I nodded, the shadow chuckling in my chest. Then there was Mrs. Joan Melia, 73, and Mrs. Ivy Lomas, 63, both in 97. Joan was a talker, always prattling about her grandchildren. I silenced her in her kitchen, the radio humming softly. Ivy was quieter, a widow who loved her cats. I found her in her parlor, stroking one as I arrived. The injection was smooth, her passing serene. I petted the cat as I left, its purrs masking the silence of her death. Each time, I felt the shadow's grip tighten, its hunger insatiable. I was careful, always. But in '98, I made a mistake. Mrs. Kathleen Grundy, 81, was wealthy, a former mayor's widow. She trusted me completely, always baking biscuits for my visits. The shadow saw opportunity, not just in her death, but in her fortune. I injected her as usual, watching her fade in her armchair, her knitting needles clattering to the floor. Then I typed a will on my office computer, naming myself her beneficiary. It was clumsy, amateurish. I'd never done it before. I thought it'd be simple, like everything else. But Sir Michael Shrigley, my partner at the practice, noticed. He saw the will riddled with errors and frowned. "This doesn't look right, Harold," he said. I brushed it off, but the shadow hissed in panic. Michael went to the police. They exhumed Kathleen's body, and the toxicology report screamed diamorphine. The shadow screamed louder. The police dug deeper. They found patterns. Too many deaths, too many elderly women, too many natural causes in my records. They exhumed more bodies. Winifred, Joan, Ivy, and 12 others. Each one bore the same mark, lethal doses of morphine. My surgery was searched. Under a chair, they found syringes and pipettes carelessly hidden. The shadow was silent now, cowering. In '99, I was arrested. The trial began at Preston Crown Court, the courtroom packed with families, their eyes burning into me. I sat calmly, my face a mask. The prosecution laid it bare. 15 murders, all women, all my patients. They read their names, Winifred Meller, Joan Melia, Ivy Lomas, and more. Each name was a knife, each face in the gallery a ghost. The shadow had abandoned me. On January 31st, 2005, the verdict came. Guilty on all counts. The judge's voice was steel. In your case, life must mean life. The courtroom erupted, families weeping, shouting. I was led away, the weight of 15 life sentences crushing me. But the truth was heavier. It wasn't just 15. The shadow knew the real number, whispered it in the dark. Hundreds, 250, maybe more. I was sent to Wakefield Prison, a gray, cold place where the walls seemed to pulse with dread. My cell was small, the air stale. The shadow was there, too, watching from the corners. I tried to outrun it. I worked in the prison library, sorted books, kept quiet. But the shadow never left. It taunted me, replaying every injection, every trusting smile. I saw their faces, Ellen, Clara, Winifred, Joan, Ivy, Kathleen, all staring, all knowing. The guilt was theirs, I told myself. They were old, frail, ready to go. But the shadow laughed. You chose them. By January 2004, I was 58. The day before my birthday, I sat in my cell, the walls closing in. The shadow was everywhere now, its voice my own. I couldn't escape it. I took my blanket, tied it tight, and looped it around the beam. As I stepped off the chair, the shadow smiled. It had always been me. Story 5. Donald Harvey, the Angel of Death. I've always been a shadow in the halls, unnoticed, unremarkable. Just Donald, the orderly, pushing carts of linens or trays of medical supplies through the sterile corridors of hospitals. My shoes squeaked softly on the polished floors, blending into the hum of machines and the faint groans of the sick. No one ever looked twice at me. Patients, nurses, doctors, they all had their own worries. That was my power, my invisibility. It let me move through their world like a ghost, deciding who would breathe and who would not. They called me the angel of death later, but to me I was just balancing things. It started in 1970 in a small hospital in London, Kentucky. I was 22, new to the job, still learning how to change bedpans and adjust pillows for the elderly. My first was an old man, 88, his face half frozen from a stroke. His name was Mr. Carter. I stood by his bed that night, watching his chest struggle to rise, each breath a wet rattle. The machines beeped, indifferent. His eyes were cloudy, fixed on the ceiling like he was already halfway gone. I don't know why I did it. Maybe it was pity. Maybe it was curiosity. I took a pillow from the chair, pressed it over his face, and held it there. His body twitched once, weakly, then stilled. The beeping stopped. I lifted the pillow, smoothed it out, and left the room. No one questioned it. Old men die in hospitals all the time. That first time, my hand shook as I walked down the hall. But by the time I got to the break room, my heart was steady. I made coffee, sat down, and listened to the night shift nurses complain about their schedules. No one mentioned Mr. Carter until morning, and even then, it was just paperwork. Natural causes, they said. I nodded, refilled my cup, and went back to work. It was so easy, too easy. I moved to Cincinnati after a few years, landing a job at the VA Medical Center. The patients there were different. Veterans, some young, some old, all broken in their own ways. The hospital was busier, the staff stretched thin, perfect for me. I learned new ways to work. Smothering was risky, too much movement, too much noise. I started experimenting. A syringe of insulin slipped into an IV line could stop a heart quietly. Morphine, just a little too much, sent them into a sleep they never woke from. I watched their faces as they faded, searching for something, relief, fear, anything. Most just looked tired. One night, I stood over a man named Henry, a double amputee with lungs full of fluid. He'd been coughing for hours, each gasp a plea. I mixed a small dose of cyanide from the supply closet into his saline bag. It wasn't hard to get. Hospitals are full of dangerous things if you know where to look. I watched the drip, slow and steady, carrying death into his veins. His coughing stopped. His eyes fluttered, then closed. I checked his pulse, waited 5 minutes, and called the nurse. "He's gone," I said, my voice flat. She sighed, marked the chart, and moved on. I went to the next room, changed a bed, and kept moving. The VA was good to me, but I got restless. I transferred to Drake Hospital in '85. Drake was quieter, mostly long-term patients, the kind no one visited. I liked it there. The halls felt like mine. I could take my time, choose carefully. I stopped counting after a while, but I think I was at 30 by then, maybe more. Each one was a puzzle. How to do it, how to make it look natural. Arsenic in a feeding tube, air bubbles in a vein, a respirator unplugged just long enough. I got good at it, like an artist perfecting a craft. I remember Jane, a woman in her 70s, coma patient. Her chart said she'd been there for years, kept alive by tubes and machines. Her room was always dark, the curtains drawn. I sat with her one evening, listening to the hiss of her ventilator. I wondered what it would be like to just stop it. I reached over, flipped the switch. The machine went silent. Her chest stopped moving. I waited, counting seconds in my head. 1 minute. 2. I turned it back on, but she didn't start breathing again. I left the room, told the nurse she'd coded. They tried to revive her, but it was too late. No one checked the machine's logs. No one ever did. I wasn't cruel. I didn't hate them. Sometimes I told myself I was helping, ending pain, freeing them from bodies that were just cages. But that wasn't the whole truth. There was a thrill in it, a quiet power. I decided who lived through the night. Me, the nobody orderly, the one they barely noticed. It was like holding a secret no one else could touch. Years passed, and I got bolder. Too bold, maybe. In '87, I was back at Drake working the night shift. I picked a patient, a man named Carl, fresh from surgery. He was weak, barely conscious. I thought cyanide again. Clean, quick. I mixed it into his IV. Same as always. He was gone in minutes. I cleaned up, went about my rounds. But this time, something went wrong. The next day, a pathologist noticed something off during the autopsy. Cyanide leaves traces, faint but unmistakable. They started asking questions. Quietly at first, then louder. I felt the walls closing in. Nurses whispered in the break room. Doctors double-checked charts. I kept my head down, did my job, but I knew they were watching. One night, a detective showed up asking about Carl. I played dumb, said I'd just checked his vitals, nothing unusual. They didn't have proof, not yet, but they kept digging. They pulled records, talked to families, looked at other deaths. Too many patients had died on my shifts. Too many natural causes. They arrested me in March. The interrogation room was cold, the lights too bright. They laid out photos. Carl, Jane, Henry, others. Names I'd forgotten, faces I hadn't. "What did you do, Donald?" they asked. I stared at the table, my hands folded. I could have denied it, fought it out in court. But I was tired. Tired of hiding. Tired of the game. So I talked. I told them about the pillow, the syringes, the machines. I told them about 37, maybe more. I didn't cry. I didn't beg. I just told them. The papers called me a monster. The angel of death, they said, like it was a title I'd chosen. I didn't care. They didn't understand. No one did. I wasn't killing for fun, not exactly. It was control, a way to matter. In those hospitals, I was nothing. But in those rooms, with those patients, I was everything. They gave me life sentences, 8 of them one after another. No death penalty. I made sure of that. Prison was different, but not so different. Same gray walls, same routines. I kept to myself, stayed quiet. The other inmates knew who I was. Some hated me, some didn't care. I thought I'd live out my days there, forgotten, just another number. But in 2017, someone decided I'd lived long enough. I was in my cell, reading a book when he come in. I didn't know him, didn't need to. He was young, angry, his fists already bloody. I didn't fight back. What was the point? He hit me, again and again until the guards pulled him off. I lay on the floor tasting blood, feeling the world slip away. My last thought wasn't about the patients or the hospitals or even myself. It was about the silence, the kind I'd given so many others. Now it was mine. Story 6. Beverley, Allitt, England, 1991. The Grantham. I was always good at hiding. As a child, I'd slip into the gaps between furniture, under beds, or behind curtains, holding my breath, thrilled by the silence of my own secrecy. No one ever found me unless I wanted them to. That skill, that quiet power, followed me into adulthood, into my crisp white uniform, into the children's ward at Grantham and Kesteven Hospital. By February 1991, I was Nurse Beverley Allitt, trusted, competent, unremarkable. But inside I was still hiding, only now I wasn't a child playing games. I was something else entirely. The ward was a small, sterile world. The hum of machines, the soft cries of infants, the scuff of shoes on linoleum, it was all so predictable. Parents hovered, their eyes heavy with worry, clutching tiny hands. Doctors barked orders, their clipboards snapping like the jaws of some impatient beast. And the children, so fragile, so dependent. They looked at me with wide, trusting eyes, their little bodies tethered to IV lines and monitors. I smiled back, my face a mask of calm, while my mind churned. I didn't know why I needed to do it, not at first. It was like an itch, deep and relentless, demanding to be scratched. It started with Liam, 7 weeks old, barely bigger than my 2 hands cupped together. February 23rd, a quiet night shift. The ward was dim, the other nurses off on their rounds or buried in paperwork. Liam's monitor beeped steadily, a tiny heartbeat pulsing through the screen. I stood over his cot, my shadow falling across his small, twitching face. He was fussy, his mother had said earlier, but now he was still, his breathing shallow. I checked his chart, my fingers brushing the syringe in my pocket. Insulin. So simple, so quiet. A dose far beyond what his tiny body could handle. I slid the needle into his IV line, quick and practiced, my hands steady as stone. The monitor didn't react right away. I waited. My breath held like I was a child again, hiding, unseen. Then the beeps faltered, grew erratic. Alarms screamed. I called for help, my voice laced with just the right amount of panic. The other nurses rushed in, their faces pale, their hands fumbling. Liam's tiny chest heaved, then stopped. They tried to save him, but I knew they wouldn't. I'd made sure of that. The ward buzzed with grief the next day. Liam's parents wept, clinging to each other, their sobs echoing down the corridor. I stood at the nurse's station, my head bowed, offering soft words of comfort. "Such a tragedy," I murmured, my hands folded neatly in front of me. Inside, I felt alive. The chaos, the attention, the way everyone turned to me for answers, it was intoxicating. I was the center of it all, the one who'd been there, the one who'd fought so hard to save him. No one suspected the truth. Why would they? I was Beverley, the quiet nurse with the gentle smile. 2 weeks later, it was Timothy, 11 months old, with chubby cheeks and a laugh that made the other nurses cool. March 5th, another night shift. The ward was quieter now. The staff stretched thin after Liam's death. Timothy was recovering from a chest infection, his small lungs rattling with each breath. I stood by his cot, watching the rise and fall of his chest, the itch in my mind growing louder. The syringe felt heavy in my pocket, like it was calling me. I didn't hesitate this time. The insulin flowed, invisible, lethal. His monitor spiked, then plummeted. I hit the alarm, my voice shaking as I called for help. The crash team came, their movements frantic, but Timothy's eyes stayed closed. His mother collapsed when they told her, her screams raw and jagged. I held her hand, my face a perfect mask of sorrow, while my heart raced with something else. Control, power, the thrill of being the only one who knew. The word changed after that. Whispers spread among the staff, a quiet unease. 2 deaths in 2 weeks, both sudden, both unexplained. The doctors ordered tests, their faces grim as they pored over charts. I watched from the edges, my presence unremarkable, My name never mentioned. I was just Beverley, always on duty, always ready to help. But the itch didn't stop. It grew stronger, hungrier. Claire was next, 15 months old, a fighter with bright eyes and a stubborn streak. March 22nd, she'd been admitted for a minor fever, nothing serious. I liked her spirit, the way she'd kick her legs and babble even when she was sick. Maybe that's why I chose her. I wanted to see how far I could push, how much I could take. The insulin was quicker this time, the dose higher. Her body seized almost immediately, her small frame convulsing in the cot. I hit the alarm, my hands trembling, not from fear, but from the rush. The other nurses didn't notice how my eyes lingered on Claire's struggling form, how I stood just a step too close. She survived, barely, her tiny body battered but clinging to life. The doctors called it a miracle. I called it a challenge. By April, the ward was a ghost of itself. Parents were terrified, their trust in us eroding. The staff was fraying, their eyes hollow from sleepless nights and unanswered questions. I thrived in the chaos. Every alarm, every crisis, every tearful parent made me feel seen, needed, alive. I didn't stop. I couldn't. Katie, 5 months old, was my next. April 4th. Her heart stopped before anyone could save her. Then Paul, 9 months, on April 18th. His small body gave out under the insulin's weight, his monitor flatlining as I stood by, my face a mask of horror. Each time I was there, the constant in the storm, my hands clean, my story flawless. But patterns are dangerous. I didn't see it at first, too caught in the thrill. The hospital started digging. Charts were cross-referenced, schedules checked. I overheard the doctors talking, their voices low, their words sharp. Insulin levels, they said, unnaturally high. I kept my head down, my smile in place, but my pulse quickened. They were looking for a reason, a cause. They were looking for me. By late April, the whispers had turned to accusations. Not of me, not yet. But the air was thick with suspicion. I kept going, unable to stop, like a moth drawn to a flame I knew would burn me. 9 other children, some I barely remember now, suffered under my hands. Some survived, their bodies scarred by my work. Others didn't. Each time I was there, my presence a shadow no one questioned. Until they did. It was a doctor who noticed first. A quiet man with sharp eyes, always watching. He'd been tracking the incidents, piecing together the timeline. "Beverley," he said one day, his voice too calm, "you were on duty for everyone." I laughed it off, my heart pounding, my mask still in place. But the seed was planted. The police came next, their questions polite but pointed. Blood tests confirmed the insulin overdoses. Schedules confirmed my presence. The net was closing, and I couldn't hide anymore. They arrested me on May 1st, 1991. The ward felt empty without me, or so I imagined. The trial was a blur, cameras flashing, parents weeping, the prosecutor's voice cold and unrelenting. They called me a monster, a predator. They didn't understand. It wasn't about hate or cruelty. It was about need, about the itch that only chaos could scratch. The doctors testified about my mind, calling it Munchausen syndrome by proxy, a name for the thing that drove me to hurt those I was meant to protect. I didn't argue. What was the point? They'd never understand the thrill of standing at the edge of life and death, of holding it in my hands. The courtroom was packed on May 28, 1993, when the verdict came. Guilty. 4 murders, 3 attempted murders, 6 counts of grievous bodily harm. The judge's voice was heavy, his words cutting. A place of safety became a place of extreme danger, he said, his eyes locked on mine. I didn't flinch. I'd hidden too well for too long to let them see me break. 30 years, he said, the minimum before they locked me away forever. Rampton High Security Hospital became my new home, its walls as cold and unyielding as my own heart. I sit here now, in my cell, the silence pressing against me. The itch is still there, quieter now, but never gone. I think about the ward sometimes, about the children, their faces blurring together. I wonder if they'd still trust me, if they'd still look at me with those wide, innocent eyes. I wonder if I'd still feel that rush, that power, if I stood over them again. The world calls me the angel of death, but they don't know the half of it. I wasn't an angel. I was a shadow, slipping through the cracks, hiding in plain sight. And shadows don't die. They just wait. Story 7. Elizabeth Wettlaufer, Nurse Serial Killer, Ontario, 2007 to 2014. I always liked the quiet of the night shift. The long-term care home in Woodstock, Ontario, where I started working in 2007, had a stillness that felt like a held breath. The hallways were dim, lit only by soft yellow bulbs that flickered faintly, casting long shadows on the linoleum floors. The residents were mostly asleep, their rooms filled with the gentle hum of oxygen machines or the occasional murmur of someone dreaming. It was just me, the charts, and the weight of their lives in my hands. I was a registered nurse, trained to care, to heal, to soothe, but something else stirred in me during those silent hours. Something I couldn't name at first. My name is Elizabeth, though the families here called me Beth. I was good at my job, great even. I knew how to adjust a feeding tube without waking a patient, how to spot a fever before it spiked, how to calm a sundowning resident with just a touch and a few soft words. The families trusted me. My co-workers, too. They'd leave me alone on the floor for hours, knowing I'd handle everything. But that trust, that solitude, it gave me room to think. Too much room. It started with Mrs. Clara, 82, in room 14. She had dementia, the kind that made her eyes vacant most days. But sometimes she'd grab my wrist and whisper, "I'm so tired, Beth." Her chart said she was stable, but I saw the way her body curled inward like it was trying to escape itself. One night, I stood by her bed, holding a syringe of insulin. It wasn't prescribed, not for her, but the thought came, sharp and unbidden. She's suffering. You can help her rest. My hands moved before my mind caught up. The needle slid into her arm smooth as a whisper. I pushed the plunger, and the insulin flowed. She didn't stir. By morning, she was gone. The doctor called it a heart attack, common at her age. No one questioned it. I felt a strange calm, like I'd done something kind. The second was Mr. Harold, 75, a year later. He'd had a stroke, couldn't speak, could barely blink to communicate. His family visited every Sunday, their faces tight with grief. I saw how much it hurt them to see him like that, trapped in a body that wouldn't let him go. One night, after they left, I stood in his room, the syringe in my pocket, heavy as a stone. It's for them too, I told myself. For his family. The insulin went in, and by the next shift, he was at peace. Another natural death. The family thanked me for my care, their eyes wet with tears. I smiled and said, I did what I could. The years blurred after that. I moved between facilities, Woodstock, Ingersoll, London, always night shifts, always the same quiet. The syringe became my shadow, always tucked in my scrub pocket. There was Mrs. Agnes, 90, whose arthritis made her moan even in sleep. Mr. James, 87, whose cancer had spread to his bones. Each time, the thought was the same. They're suffering, I can stop it. Each time, the insulin flowed and they slipped away. No one noticed the pattern. Why would they? Old people die. That's what nursing homes are for, isn't it? But it wasn't always clean. Sometimes they didn't die. Like Mrs. Dorothy, 78, who woke up gasping after I gave her the dose. Her blood sugar had crashed, but she survived. I stood frozen as the other nurses rushed in, stabilizing her. They thought it was a fluke, a mix-up in her meds. I nodded, my heart pounding, and promised to double-check next time. Then there was Mr. Leonard, 84, who lingered for days after the injection, his breathing shallow but stubborn. I watched him, willing him to let go, but he didn't. I tried again, a higher dose, but he pulled through. I started to wonder if I was losing my touch. The nights grew heavier after that. I'd walk the halls, checking charts, but my eyes kept drifting to the insulin vials in the med room. It was like they called to me, their clear liquid glinting under the fluorescent lights. I told myself I was helping, that I was giving them peace, but sometimes I'd catch my reflection in a window and not recognize the woman staring back. Her eyes were too empty, her mouth too tight. I'd shake it off, focus on the next patient, the next syringe. By 2013, I was at a new facility in London. The staff was smaller, the oversight looser. I got careless. One night, I gave Mrs. Maureen, 96, a dose, but I misjudged it. She didn't die. She just got sicker, her vitals crashing in ways that didn't make sense. The day nurse noticed, started asking questions. I lied, said I'd found her like that, but I could feel her eyes on me for weeks after. I stopped for a while, tried to be normal. I'd chat with the families, bring cookies for the staff, anything to keep them from looking too closely. But the urge came back, stronger each time. The last one was Mrs. Helen, 83, in 2014. She was new, transferred from a hospital after a fall. Her chart said she was recovering, but I saw the fear in her eyes, the way she clutched the bed rails when she thought no one was looking. I stood by her bed, the syringe ready, my hand steady. This is the last time, I told myself. Just her, then I'll stop. The insulin went in, and I waited. Her breathing slowed, then stopped. I checked her pulse, felt nothing. I was about to leave when I heard a sound, a faint gasp. My heart lurched. She was still alive. I panicked. I grabbed another vial, gave her more. Too much. Her body seized, a soft convulsion that made the bed creak. Then she was gone. I stood there, trembling, the empty syringe in my hand. The room felt too small, the air too thick. I cleaned up, fixed her chart, and left. But something broke in me that night. I couldn't shake the image of her face, the way her body fought to hold on. The next week, I quit. I told them I was burned out, needed a break. They believed me, even threw me a little goodbye party with cake and cards. I smiled through it, but inside, I was unraveling. The faces of Clara, Harold, Agnes, James, Dorothy, Leonard, Maureen, Helen, they crowded my dreams, their eyes accusing. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. The syringe was gone, but I still felt its weight in my pocket. In 2017, it all came apart. I don't know why I did it. Maybe I wanted it to end. Maybe I needed someone to stop me. I walked into a police station and told them everything. The insulin, the patients, the years of silence. They didn't believe me at first, thought I was confused. But I kept talking, naming names, dates, places. They checked the records and the truth clawed its way out. 8 dead. 4 almost dead. 2 others, hurt but alive. The families were devastated. The headlines screamed about a killer nurse, a monster in scrubs. I didn't read them. I didn't need to. The courtroom was cold, the faces of the families colder. I pleaded guilty, told them I was sorry, that I thought I was helping. Some of them cried. Some of them stared like they could burn me with their eyes. The judge gave me life, no parole for 25 years. I didn't argue. I deserved it, maybe more. Now I'm here in a cell that smells like bleach and rust. The nights are quiet, like the nursing home, but there's no syringe, no charts, no patients, just me and the dark. I lie awake, listening to the hum of the prison, and I see them. Clara, Harold, Agnes, James, Dorothy, Leonard, Maureen, Helen. They don't speak, but they're there, in the shadows, watching, waiting. I don't know what for. Maybe they don't either. I used to think I was giving them peace. Now I wonder if I stole it instead. The quiet of the night shift isn't calm anymore. It's heavy, like a hand pressing down on my chest. And every night, I wait for it to crush me. Story 8. The Shadow in Scrubs. I am Charles, a nurse, a silent guardian of the sick. At least, that's what they called me at first, when I walked the sterile halls of St. Luke's in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, my sneakers squeaking softly against the linoleum. The year was 1988, and I was fresh out of nursing school, my crisp white scrubs a badge of purpose. Patients smiled at me, their eyes heavy with trust. "You're so kind, Charles," they'd whisper, their voices frail, clinging to life. I'd nod, my hand steady as I adjusted their IV lines, checked their charts, and slipped into their rooms like a shadow. But something stirred in me, something I couldn't name. It wasn't anger or hate. It was quieter, colder, a need to decide who lingered and who faded. The first time it happened, it felt like an accident. Her name was Eleanor, an elderly woman with pneumonia, her breaths rattling like dry leaves. I stood by her bed, the dim glow of the monitor casting long shadows across her face. Her chart said she was stable, but stable wasn't enough. Not for her, not for me. My fingers brushed the vial of digoxin in my pocket, a heart drug, potent and precise, just a little too much, and her heart would slow, then stop. I pushed the syringe into her IV line, the liquid vanishing into the tube. Her monitor beeped, then flatlined. I called the code, my voice calm, my hands performing CPR I knew wouldn't save her. The doctors rushed in, but Eleanor was gone. They called it natural causes. I called it mercy. The feeling stayed with me, sharp and electric. I moved to another hospital, Hunterdon Medical Center, in 1991. New faces, same trust. Patients thanked me, their families sent cards. But the need grew stronger. I chose carefully those who seemed too tired, too broken. A man with cancer, his eyes sunken, his voice a rasp. A woman with kidney failure, her skin gray. Digoxin was my tool, but insulin worked too, slipping silently into their veins, sending their blood sugar crashing. Each time I watched the monitors, the numbers dropping, the alarms screaming. I'd stand back, my face a mask of concern, while inside I felt alive. By 1993, I was at Warren Hospital. The staff liked me. Quiet, reliable Charles. But whispers started. A nurse named Sarah caught me lingering in a patient's room after hours, my syringe empty. "What are you doing, Charles?" she asked, her eyes narrowing. I mumbled something about adjusting the drip, but her gaze followed me after that. 2 weeks later, a patient died unexpectedly, his blood tests showing a spike in digoxin. Sarah stared at me in the break room, her coffee cup trembling. I left Warren soon after, citing personal reasons. They didn't ask questions. Hospitals never did. They needed nurses too badly. The years blurred. Lehigh Valley Hospital, Easton Hospital, Sacred Heart. Each one a new stage, each patient a new choice. I kept count at first, 10, 15, 20, but the number slipped away, like beads from a broken string. I didn't enjoy it, not exactly. It was necessity, a compulsion to ease their suffering, or so I told myself. Digoxin, insulin, potassium chloride. I learned their rhythms, how much to give, how long to wait. I'd sit by their beds, my voice soft, saying, "It's okay, you'll rest now." Their eyes would flutter, then close. The alarms would wail, and I'd step back, invisible in the chaos. By 1998, I was at Liberty Nursing Home. The elderly were easier, fewer questions, weaker hearts. But a co-worker, Michael, grew suspicious. He noticed I was always on shift when patients coded. "You're like a bad luck charm, Charles," he joked, but his eyes weren't laughing. One night, he found me in the med room, a vial of insulin in my hand. "What's that for?" he demanded. I shrugged, said it was for a diabetic patient. He reported me to the supervisor, but I was gone before they could investigate. Another hospital, another fresh start. Somerset Medical Center in 2003 was my final act. The hospital was modern, its halls bright and bustling. I blended in, just another nurse in blue scrubs. But I was careless. A woman named Clara, 68, coded after I gave her digoxin. Her blood tests came back, the levels impossibly high. Then another patient, George, died the same way. The pharmacy noticed missing vials, and the nurses started talking. Amy, a fellow nurse, was the worst. She was kind, too kind, always watching, always asking questions. "Charles, why were you in Clara's room so late?" she'd say, her voice gentle but probing. I smiled, deflected, but I saw her taking notes, checking charts. The police came in December. They found me in the break room, my hands wrapped around a cold cup of coffee. "Charles Cullen, we need to talk," the detective said. I didn't resist. Something in me was tired, ready to stop. In the interrogation room, I spilled it all. 30, 40 patients, maybe more. I told them I wanted to help, to end their pain. The detective's face was stone, but his pen never stopped moving. "Mercy," I said, the word heavy in my mouth. They didn't believe me. Neither did I, not anymore. The courtroom was a blur of faces, families, reporters, Amy staring from the back. I pleaded guilty. 29 counts of murder. The judge's voice was cold as he sentenced me to 11 life terms. The families screamed, cried, called me a monster. I didn't look at them. I couldn't. The cell door closed behind me, the sound final, like a heart stopping. Solitary confinement is quiet, just me and the walls. I lie on my cot, staring at the ceiling, seeing their faces, Eleanor, Clara, George, countless others. Their eyes ask why, but I have no answer. I was Charles, the good nurse. Now I'm Charles, the shadow. The hospitals still stand, their halls filled with new nurses, new patients. I wonder if they feel me. A chill in the air, a flicker, in the monitors. I wonder if they know how close death walks. Dressed in scrubs, carrying a syringe. Story 9. Lucy Letby, Chester Hospital, Neonatal Murders, England, 2015 to 2016. The first time I noticed something was wrong, it was the quiet. Not the kind of quiet you'd expect in a neonatal ward, where the soft hum of monitors and the occasional cry of a newborn usually filled the air. This was different. A stillness that seemed to swallow sound, like the world was holding its breath. I was a junior nurse at the Countess of Chester Hospital, fresh out of training, eager to make a difference. The neonatal unit was my world, a place where fragile lives hung in the balance, and I thought I knew what to expect. But that night, in June 2015, something shifted. I was on the night shift, my sneakers squeaking faintly on the linoleum as I moved from one incubator to the next, checking vitals. The ward was dim, the overhead lights softened to let the babies sleep. My colleague, Lucy, was there too. She was always there, calm, composed, her blonde hair neatly tied back, her smile just warm enough to put you at ease. She'd been at the hospital longer than me, a senior nurse who seemed to know every machine, every procedure like the back of her hand. Everyone trusted her. I did too at first. That night, I was monitoring baby A premature boy who'd been stable for days. His tiny chest rose and fell steadily, his heart rate a reassuring blip on the screen. I logged his stats and moved on, but something made me glance back. Lucy was standing by his incubator, her hands moving quickly, adjusting something, a tube maybe, or the IV line. She didn't look up, didn't acknowledge me. I brushed it off. She was meticulous, always double-checking things. That's what made her so good. An hour later, the alarms went off. Baby A's monitor was screaming, his oxygen levels plummeting. I rushed over, my heart pounding, but Lucy was already there, her face a mask of calm as she worked the resuscitator. "He's crashing," she said, her voice steady. "We tried everything, chest compressions, oxygen, adrenaline, but his tiny body went limp. By the time the doctor arrived, it was over. Baby A was gone. The ward was chaos after that, but Lucy stayed calm, guiding me through the paperwork, her hand steady as she wrote the report. I was shaken, my hands trembling as I filled out my part. "It happens," she said softly, her eyes meeting mine. "Sometimes they're just too fragile." I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. She was right. Preemies were delicate, but that quiet, the way it seemed to linger around her, stayed with me. The next week, it happened again. Baby B, a girl born at 34 weeks. She'd been gaining weight, her prognosis good. I'd checked her at midnight, everything normal, but at 3 a.m., another alarm, another collapse. Lucy was there again, her hands moving over the equipment with that same eerie precision. We lost Baby B too. The doctor looked grim, muttering about sudden collapses, but Lucy just shook her head, her expression sympathetic. "It's awful," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "but we did all we could." I started noticing things after that, little details, things that didn't add up. The way Lucy was always there when a baby crashed, her name on every shift rota for every incident. The way the ward felt colder when she was around, like the air itself was heavier. I told myself I was being paranoid. Babies died in neonatal units sometimes. It was tragic, but it wasn't unheard of. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. By August, we'd lost 3 more. Baby C, a boy with a heart defect, went into cardiac arrest during a quiet shift. Baby D, a girl who'd been improving, stopped breathing an hour after Lucy adjusted her feeding tube. Baby E, another boy, crashed in the middle of the night, his blood tests later showing something strange, high insulin levels, like he'd been poisoned. I overheard the doctors talking about it, their voices low, but no one said anything to us nurses. Lucy was there for all of them, her face always the same, calm, composed, untouchable. I started watching her. I couldn't help it. The way she moved through the ward, her steps silent, her hands always busy. She'd linger by the incubators, her fingers brushing over the tubes, the monitors, the IV lines. Once, I caught her staring at a baby's chart, her lips moving slightly like she was whispering to herself. When she saw me, she smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Just double-checking," she said, slipping the chart back into its slot. The other nurses didn't seem to notice. They loved Lucy, trusted her. She was the one who stayed late, who volunteered for the tough shifts, who always seemed to know what to do. But I started keeping my own notes, scribbling down times and dates, trying to make sense of it. Every collapse happened on her watch. Every death had her name tied to it somehow. I told myself it was coincidence, that I was seeing patterns where there weren't any. But the quiet, that suffocating quiet, followed her everywhere. In October, I found something. I was cleaning out a supply closet when I noticed a syringe tucked behind a box of gloves. It wasn't labeled, wasn't in a sterile packet like it should have been. I didn't touch it, but I told my supervisor. She frowned, said she'd look into it, but nothing came of it. The syringe was gone the next day. I asked Lucy about it casually, trying to keep my voice steady. She just shrugged, her smile tight. "Probably just misplaced," she said. "Happens all the time." By December, the ward felt like a graveyard. We'd lost 7 babies in 6 months, and the doctors were starting to ask questions. They ordered blood tests, autopsies, anything to explain the unexplainable. One of the consultants mentioned air embolisms, bubbles in the bloodstream that could kill in minutes. Another talked about insulin, how it could cause a baby's blood sugar to crash. I listened, my stomach twisting. I'd seen Lucy with syringes, seen her adjusting IVs. But I had no proof, nothing but my notes and that gnawing fear. I tried to talk to my supervisor again, but she brushed me off. "Lucy's one of our best," she said. "Don't go stirring things up without evidence." I wanted to scream. The evidence was in the bodies, in the charts, in the way the ward went silent when Lucy was there. But I kept quiet, kept watching. In January 2016, it got worse. Baby F, a twin, collapsed during my shift. I was across the room, checking another baby, when the alarm went off. Lucy was already there, her hands on the resuscitator. "He's not responding," she said, her voice flat. We lost him. His twin, baby G, crashed the next night. Lucy again. Always Lucy. I started having nightmares. Her face in the dark, her hands moving over the incubators, the baby's cries cutting off one by one. I started avoiding her. I'd switch shifts, take breaks when she was around, anything to keep my distance. But she noticed. One night, she cornered me in this break room, her eyes sharp. "You've been quiet lately," she said, her voice soft but edged. "Everything okay?" I mumbled something about being tired, but my hands were shaking. She just smiled, that same empty smile, and walked away. By June 2016, The hospital was under scrutiny. The deaths had piled up. 7 confirmed, with 7 more babies harmed, some left with permanent damage. The police were involved now, asking questions, pulling records. I saw them talking to Lucy, her face pale but composed, her answers smooth. She was untouchable even then. One night, I stayed late, going over my notes. The ward was empty, the lights dim. I heard footsteps behind me and turned to see Lucy standing in the doorway, her silhouette framed by the hallway light. "You've been busy," she said, her voice low, writing things down. My heart stopped. She stepped closer, her eyes locked on mine. "Be careful," she said. "You don't know what you're getting into." I quit the next day. I couldn't stay, couldn't face her or the ward or the ghosts of those babies. The police came to my flat a week later, asking about my notes. I gave them everything. Dates, times, the syringe, the way the ward went silent when she was there. They listened, their faces grim, but they didn't say much. A year later, I heard she'd been arrested, charged with 7 murders, 8 attempted murders. The trial dragged on. Every detail splashed across the news. Insulin poisoning, air embolisms, her calm demeanor in court. In August 2023, she was convicted, sentenced to life with no chance of release. I read about the inquiry later, how the hospital ignored warnings, how they let her keep working even after the first suspicions. I think about those babies every day, their tiny faces, the way the ward went quiet. I think about Lucy, her smile, her hands, the way she moved through the unit like a shadow. And I wonder how many more she might have hurt if I hadn't written it all down. I don't sleep much anymore. When I do, I dream of the ward, the monitors, the silence, and her, always her, standing by the incubators, her hands moving in the dark. Story 10. Genene Jones, Texas pediatric nurse, USA, 1970s to 1980s. I don't know when it started, not exactly. The moment my hands, steady and practiced, stopped saving lives and began something else. Maybe it was always there. A shadow curled tight in my chest, waiting for the right place, the right time. The pediatric ICU at Bexar County Hospital was that place. Those long fluorescent lit nights were that time. The beeps of monitors, the soft hum of ventilators, the tiny bodies swaddled in white. They called to me, not to heal, but to control, to decide who stayed and who slipped away. It was 1978 when I first noticed how easy it was. A syringe, a vial, a moment's privacy. The drugs were always there, lined up like soldiers in the med room. Succinylcholine, digoxin, heparin, each one a key to a different kind of silence. Succinylcholine was my favorite. A paralytic, swift, and merciless. It locked their little lungs, stopped their breath, and left no trace. The monitors would scream, the alarms would wail, and I'd be there, rushing in, the picture of panic. "Code blue!" I'd shout, my voice sharp, commanding. The other nurses would swarm, but it was always too late. I made sure of it. The first one was a boy, barely 6 months old. His name was Daniel, I think. His chart said he was recovering from pneumonia, his vitals stable. I stood by his crib that night, watching his chest rise and fall, the tiniest whisper of life. The ward was quiet, the other nurses at the station chatting over coffee. My fingers found the syringe in my pocket, already loaded. Just a small dose, I told myself, just to see. I slipped the needle into his IV line, pushed the plunger, and waited. His monitor flatlined in under a minute. The alarm shrieked. and I was the first to his side, calling for help, my hands flying through the motions of CPR. But I knew, Daniel was gone, and I'd done it. The power of it, the weight of that choice, hummed in my veins like electricity. They called it a tragedy, a fluke. Babies in the ICU were fragile after all. No one suspected. Why would they? I was Genene, the reliable nurse, the one who stayed late, who held mothers' hands when they cried. I was good at that part too, playing the savior, the comforter. It made the next one easier. Her name was Maria, a 2-year-old with a heart defect. She'd been improving, smiling even, her big brown eyes tracking me as I checked her lines. That night, I chose digoxin. It was slower, subtler. A heart attack looked natural in a child like her. I dosed her just before my break, then sat at the lounge, sipping tea, listening for the alarms. When they came, I ran back, my face a mask of shock. Maria's mother was there, screaming as the team worked. I held her shoulders, murmuring useless words, while inside I felt it again, that rush, that godlike certainty. I'd chosen, and the world had obeyed. The crashes kept happening, one after another. A preemie named Jacob, a toddler called Sarah. Each one a test, a proof of my control. The other nurses started whispering about my shifts. Death shift, they called it, half joking, half scared. They didn't know how right they were. The doctors noticed too, but they didn't dig. Hospitals don't like scandals. They'd rather blame bad luck than a bad nurse. I kept my charts perfect, my demeanor calm. I was untouchable. By 1980, I'd lost count. 20? 30? The faces blurred, but the feeling never did. Each crash was a high, each flat line a victory. I started getting bolder, heparin to make them bleed out, succinylcholine to stop their breath. I'd stand by their cribs watching the monitors, timing it just right. Sometimes I'd bring them back just to see if I could. A shot of adrenaline, a few compressions, and they'd gasp back to life. Those were the best moments, holding their fates in my hands, deciding whether to let them go or pull them back. But I wasn't careless, never careless. I knew how to cover my tracks. A misplaced vial here, a smudged chart there. The hospital was chaos, overworked staff, outdated systems. It was easy to slip through the cracks. Still, I could feel eyes on me. The whispers grew louder. One night, I overheard 2 nurses at the station. "It's always her shift," one said. Always. The other shushed her, but I saw the fear in their eyes. They were starting to wonder. In 1981, I pushed too far. His name was Joshua, 11 months old, admitted for a fever. He was a fighter, chubby and strong, giggling when I tickled his toes. I chose succinylcholine again, but this time I stayed too long, watching his monitor flatline. Another nurse walked in, Carol, the nosy one. She saw me by his crib, saw the syringe in my hand. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice sharp. I mumbled something about checking his IV, but her eyes narrowed. She didn't say anything, not then, but I knew she'd talk. Joshua didn't make it. Carol went to the supervisor the next day. I was called into the office, my heart pounding, but I kept my face blank. They asked questions, vague, careful ones. I answered smoothly, my voice steady. They didn't have proof. They couldn't. The hospital didn't want trouble, so they did what hospitals do. They asked me to resign. No police, no investigation. Just a quiet exit and a sealed file. I packed my things and left, my hands shaking with rage. They thought they'd stop me. They were wrong. I found work at a pediatric clinic in Careville, a small town nearby. The clinic was perfect, less oversight, fewer eyes. I started again, slower this time, careful. A girl named Chelsea was my first there, 15 months old, blonde curls, brought in for a checkup. I gave her succinylcholine in the exam room, just a tiny dose. She crashed in minutes. Her mother screamed. The doctor ran in, but it was too late. I played my part, shocked, tearful, helpful. They called it a seizure, a sudden tragedy. No one checked the vial I'd tossed in the sharps bin. But Chelsea's mother wouldn't let it go. She kept calling, asking questions. The clinic started looking closer. They found traces of succinylcholine in Chelsea's blood, traces that shouldn't have been there. The police came next. I was arrested in 1982, my face plastered across the news. Baby killer nurse, they called me. The trial was a circus, mothers sobbing, doctors pointing fingers. They convicted me for Chelsea's murder in 1984. 99 years. I thought that was the end. Prison was gray, endless. I kept my head down, my mouth shut. The other inmates whispered about me, but I didn't care. I knew the system. Texas law meant I'd be out in 30 years, maybe less. Good behavior, overcrowding. They'd let me go. I counted the days, the years. By 2017, I could taste freedom. But then the letters started. Families, prosecutors, digging up the past. They'd found new evidence, old charts, witnesses who'd stayed silent too long. They wanted me to stay locked away. The new charges came fast. Joshua's case was reopened, others too. Babies I barely remembered. In 2020, they dragged me to court again. I was older, weaker, but I knew the game. I pleaded guilty to Joshua's murder, admitted to the drugs, the crashes. What else could I do? They gave me another life sentence, no parole until 2038. The judge's words echoed in my head, the suffering you caused. But he didn't understand. None of them did. It wasn't about suffering. It was about power, about holding life in my hands and choosing. The cell is small, the walls cold. I lie on my bunk at night, staring at the ceiling, remembering the beeps, the alarms, the rush. I see their faces sometimes. Daniel, Maria, Joshua, Chelsea. Dozens of them, maybe 60, maybe more. They don't haunt me. They're mine, in a way. My choices, my marks. The world can call me a monster, but they'll never know what it felt like to be a god. I close my eyes, and the monitors hum in my dreams. The death shift never ends. Story 11, The Pulse of the Night. My name is Niels, and I'm a nurse. The hospital is my world, a sterile maze of beeping monitors, antiseptic air, and the hum of life clinging to machines. At night, when the halls grow quiet and the lights dim, I walk among the patients in the ICU, their breaths shallow, their hearts tethered to my care. I've always been good at this job, too good perhaps. The others, doctors, nurses, aides, they see me as steady, reliable. Niels has a gift, they say, but they don't know the truth. They don't know what happens when the night shift begins, when the ward becomes my stage and I chase the rush that only a heartbeat can give. It started years ago in Oldenburg at the clinic where I first worked. The ICU was a pressure cooker, patients teetering on the edge, families weeping in the waiting room, and us, the staff, racing against death. I was new, eager to prove myself. One night, a patient coded. His monitor screamed, a flat line tearing through the silence. I leapt into action, chest compressions, barking orders, the defibrillator's jolt. We saved him. The family clutched my hands, tears in their eyes, calling me a hero. That word, hero, It sank into me warm and sharp, like a needle in a vein. I wanted it again. But heroes need crises, and crises don't always come on their own. The first time was an accident, or so I told myself. A patient, Frau Keller, was fading, pneumonia, weak heart, barely holding on. Her monitor beeped erratically, and I stood by her bed, my fingers brushing the syringe of ajmaline in my pocket. It was meant for emergencies, to stabilize a heart in chaos. But what if I gave it now? Just a small dose, enough to push her heart into a storm, enough to call a code, enough to let me save her. My hand shook as I pushed the plunger. Her monitor spiked, alarms blaring. I shouted for help, my voice steady despite the thrill clawing at my chest. Compressions, shocks, adrenaline. We brought her back. The other nurses clapped my shoulder, their eyes wide with awe. You're a miracle worker, Niels. Miracle worker, I like that. Frau Keller didn't last long after that. Her heart was too weak, they said. But I barely noticed her death. I was already thinking of the next time, the next chance to feel that rush. It wasn't about her, it was about the moment, the alarms, the chaos, the way everyone looked at me when the patient's pulse returned. I started to plan. Not every night, not at first. Just once in a while when the ward was quiet and the other nurses were distracted, a patient here, a patient there. Always the ones who were already frail, the ones no one would question. I'd slip ajmaline or adrenaline into their IVs, watch the monitors go wild, and then dive in to save them. Sometimes they lived, sometimes they didn't. But the rush was always there. By the time I moved to Delmenhorst, I was bolder. The hospital was smaller, the staff stretched thin. Perfect. I worked nights mostly, prowling the ICU like a hunter. I knew the patient's charts by heart. Who was critical, who was stable, who could take a push. Herr Braun, 68, Herzversagen. Frau Schmidt, 74, sepsis. I'd stand by their beds, my gloved hand steady, my pulse racing. The syringe was my wand, the monitor, my audience. A quick injection, a wait, and then the chaos I craved, alarms, running feet, my voice cutting through the panic. Get the crash cart! I was untouchable, a god in scrubs. But gods make mistakes. One night, I chose Frau Weber. She was 81, a stroke patient, sedated and silent. Her chart said she was stable, but I saw an opportunity. The ward was quiet, the other nurses at the station laughing over coffee. I slipped into her room, my syringe ready. Adrenaline this time, a tiny dose, just enough to spark a crisis. I pushed it into her fourth, my eyes on the monitor. Her heart rate climbed, erratic, then flatlined. Perfect. I called the code, my hands already on her chest, compressing, counting. The team rushed in and we worked. Defibrillator, drugs, the whole routine. But Frau Weber didn't come back. Her heart stayed still, her body cold. The doctor called it. Time of death, 2:17 a.m. I should have felt something, guilt, fear, anything, but all I felt was irritation. She was supposed to live at least long enough for me to look like the hero. I shrugged it off, told myself it was her time. The others didn't suspect a thing. You did everything you could, Niels, they said. I nodded, my face grim, while inside I was already planning the next one. The deaths piled up. Not every time, but enough that I started to notice patterns. Patients coded more often on my shifts. Families whispered in the halls, their eyes darting to me, then away. The doctors didn't see it. They were too busy, too tired. But the nurses, some of them were sharper. Anna, a senior nurse, started watching me. She'd linger near my patients' rooms, her clipboard clutched tight, her lips a thin line. "You're always in the thick of it, Niels," she said once, her tone flat. I laughed it off, said I was just unlucky, but her eyes didn't leave mine. I got careless. That was my mistake. One night, I picked Herr Lang, a diabetic in his 60s. He was sedated, recovering from surgery, easy target. I waited till the ward was quiet, slipped into his room. The syringe was in my hand, adrenaline gleaming in the dim light. I was about to inject when I heard a gasp. Anna stood in the doorway, her eyes wide, her hand over her mouth. "Niels, what are you doing?" My mind raced. I dropped the syringe, let it clatter to the floor. "He's crashing," I lied, pointing to the monitor. I was about to call a code. But the monitor was steady, Herr Lange's heart beating strong, Anna's face hardened. She didn't say a word, just turned and walked away. I knew then I was done. The police came the next day. They found the syringe, tested it, adrenaline, not prescribed. They searched my locker, my apartment. More syringes, vials of ajmaline, notes I'd kept stupidly about which patients I'd chosen. They questioned me for hours, their voices cold, their eyes like knives. I denied it at first, said it was a mistake, a mix-up. But they had Anna's statement, the syringe, the patterns. Too many deaths, too many codes, all tied to me. In the end, I told them, not everything, but enough. I said I wanted to save them, to be the hero. I didn't tell them about the rush, the way my blood sang when the alarm screamed. They wouldn't understand. No one would. The trials came fast. Oldenburg first, then Delmenhorst. The courtroom was packed, families sobbing, reporters scribbling. They called me a monster, a killer. They said I'd taken 85 lives, maybe more. Hundreds, they whispered, though they couldn't prove it. The judge's voice was like stone. Life sentence, no chance of release. The worst, they said, the worst in Germany's history. Now I'm here, in this cell, the walls gray and cold. The hospital is gone, the monitor's silent. But at night, when I close my eyes, I'm back there. The ICU hums, the alarms wail, and I'm running, my hands on a chest, counting compressions. The rush is still there, faint but alive, pulsing in my veins. I see their faces. Frau Keller, Herr Braun, Frau Weber, all of them. They don't speak, don't move. They just watch me, their eyes empty, their hearts still. I'm not a hero anymore. I'm not a god. I'm just Niels, the nurse who chased a feeling and lost everything. But in the dark, when the prison is quiet, I can still hear it. The beep of a monitor, the flatline scream. And for a moment, just a moment, I'm alive again. Story 12. Reta Mays, VA Hospital Nursing Assistant Killer, USA 2018 to 2019. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a sterile glow across Ward 3A of the Veterans Affairs Medical Center in Clarksburg, West Virginia. I was Reta Mays, a certified nursing assistant, and the night shift was my domain. The hospital was quiet at 2 a.m., save for the soft beeps of monitors and the occasional groan from a patient. My sneakers squeaked faintly on the linoleum as I moved from room to room, checking charts, adjusting IVs, and offering water to those who stirred. To everyone else, I was a caretaker, a steady hand in the dark hours. But they didn't know the truth. They didn't know what I carried in my pocket or the weight of the choice I'd made. It started in the spring of 2018. The ward was full, mostly older veterans, men who'd seen wars and carried scars, some visible, some not. I'd been working nights for years, blending into the background, my presence as unremarkable as the beige walls. But something had shifted inside me. It wasn't sudden, not a snap or a break, but a slow unraveling. I'd seen patients come and go, some clinging to life, others slipping away despite the doctor's best efforts. I started to wonder what it would feel like to decide, to choose who stayed and who didn't. The first was Mr. Thompson, a wiry man in his 60s, room 312. He was recovering from a heart procedure, set to go home in a few days. His chart noted his diabetes, managed with oral meds, not insulin. I stood by his bed that night, watching his chest rise and fall, the monitor tracing steady lines. My hand slipped into my pocket, fingers brushing the syringe I'd taken from the supply closet. It was small, unassuming, filled with insulin I'd drawn up in the bathroom, away from prying eyes. Nursing assistants weren't allowed to handle insulin. That was for nurses, doctors, but I'd watched them enough to know how it worked, how a little too much could send blood sugar plummeting, how it could stop a heart. I leaned over Mr. Thompson, my shadow falling across his face. The syringe was cold in my hand. I found the fourth line, the port where the needle would fit. My pulse quickened, not with fear, but with something else. Control. The plunger slid down, silent, and the insulin flowed into his vein. I stepped back, tucking the syringe away, and waited. An hour later, his monitor alarmed. His blood sugar was crashing. Nurses rushed in, confused, barking orders. I stood by, expression blank, offering to fetch supplies. By dawn, Mr. Thompson was gone. Cardiac arrest, they said. A tragedy, but not unheard of for a man his age. I felt alive in a way I hadn't before. The power was intoxicating, like holding a secret no one else could touch. I didn't choose randomly after that. I picked the ones close to discharge, the ones who'd almost made it out. Mr. Carter in June, room 305, a gruff veteran with a bad knee, ready to go home to his daughter. Then Mr. Hayes in August, room 317, a quiet man who liked to talk about his old fishing trips. Each time, I moved the same way. Check the hall, draw the insulin in private, slip it into the IV. Each time the monitors screamed, the staff scrambled, and I faded into the background, another pair of hands in the chaos. By winter, I'd done it 4 times. The hospital was starting to notice. Whispers floated among the staff. Too many deaths, too similar. Hypoglycemia, they said, but none of these patients were on insulin. Charts were double-checked, meetings held. I kept my head down, my routine unchanged. I was careful, always using a fresh syringe, disposing of it in the sharps bin like it was just another needle. But I started to feel eyes on me. Not suspicion, not yet, but curiosity. A nurse asked me once, "Reta, you were on last night, right? Did you see anything odd with Mr. Hayes?" I shook my head, my face a mask of concern. "No, ma'am. He seemed fine when I checked on him." The fifth was Mr. Larson, early 2019. He was a big man, a Vietnam vet with a laugh that echoed down the hall. His chart said he was stable, discharge planned for Friday. I chose him because he was loud, because his presence filled the room, because I wanted to see if I could take that away. That night, I moved faster, more confident. The syringe was ready before I even reached his room. I stood over him, watching his broad chest rise, and pushed the insulin in. But this time, something went wrong. His monitor didn't alarm right away. I lingered too long, adjusting his blanket to look busy, when a nurse walked in. She glanced at me, then at the IV line, her brow furrowing. "Reta, what are you doing?" she asked, her tone sharp. I mumbled something about checking his drip and slipped out, my heart pounding. The next night, Mr. Larson was dead. But the nurse's question stuck with me. I started varying my shifts, picking different rooms, different times. I couldn't stop, though. The need was too strong, like an itch I had to scratch. Mr. Bennett in March, room 310. Mr. Wallace in May, room 308. Each one felt like a test, a challenge to see how far I could go. 7 in all, over a year. 7 men who'd trusted me, who'd smiled when I brought them water or adjusted their pillows. 7 men who never woke up. The hospital was on edge now. The deaths were too many, too strange. I overheard doctors talking about an investigation, something about the VA's Inspector General. They were pulling charts, reviewing footage, talking to staff. I kept my routine, but I started to feel the walls closing in. I made a mistake with the 8th Mr. Daniels. He was younger, early 50s, recovering from a stroke. I chose him because he was chatty, always asking about my day like we were friends. I didn't like that. I wanted distance, so I slipped the insulin into his IV, just like before. But he didn't die. His blood sugar crashed, but a nurse caught it in time, pumping glucose until he stabilized. I was in the room when it happened, and I saw the way she looked at me, really looked, like she was seeing me for the first time. They started watching me after that. I could feel it in the way the nurses lingered when I was near, the way the supervisor asked me to recount my rounds. They didn't have proof, not yet, but they were looking. I stopped for a while, tried to go back to being just Reta, the quiet assistant who kept to herself. But the urge was still there, clawing at me. I started planning again, picking my next patient, but I was sloppy. I didn't notice the new cameras in the supply closet, didn't think about the audits they were running on every syringe, every vial. It was July 2020 when they came for me. 2 men in suits, not hospital staff, waiting for me at the end of my shift. They knew. They'd pieced it together. Patient charts, insulin traces in the bodies, my name on every shift when a death occurred. They exhumed the bodies, tested the blood, found the evidence I thought I'd hidden. I sat in a small room, the fluorescent lights buzzing just like in the ward, and they laid it all out. 7 murders, 1 attempted. I didn't fight it. I told them everything, how I'd chosen them, how I'd done it, how it felt. I didn't know why I'd started, not really, but I couldn't stop. They took me away that day, my badge left on the table, my life unraveling as fast as it had begun. In court, they called me a monster, said I'd betrayed the trust of those I was meant to protect. The families wept, their faces twisted with grief and rage. I didn't look at them. I couldn't. In May 2021, the judge sentenced me. 7 life sentences, 1 for each man plus 20 years for Mr. Daniels. The words echoed in my head as they led me out. Lethal betrayal. Now, I sit in a cell. The walls as beige as the hospital's, the lights just as harsh. I think about Ward 3A sometimes, the way the monitors beep, the way the night stretched on. I think about the men I chose, their faces, their voices. I don't feel guilt, not the way people expect. What I feel is emptier, colder, like the syringe in my hand that night with Mr. Thompson. I was their caretaker, their shadow in the dark. and I made my choice.